Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Welcome to the Networking RX podcast. I am your host, Frank Agan, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections. Today, I have another wonderful guest, as our ongoing subscribers know. Often on this podcast, it's me sharing ideas, insights, best practices for building professional relationships and excelling at business networking. Occasionally, however, I will be interviewing subject matter experts, authors, speakers, thought leaders, social scientists, and they help supplement the things that I talk about, help us share their knowledge to help us build better relationships. And quite honestly, lately I've had tons of great guests, and I feel it's more guests than me, but that's fine. At any rate, imagine if you knew the secrets to lead your team to all the innovation, engagement, and profit you can dream of accomplishing. You know, the team's marching through organizational change, innovation with success, your culture is thriving, and you're amazing at all the ways in which your team contributes to the greater good. Today, I have on the program Charlotte Allen, and she is somebody who works with companies and organizations to, namely their STEM leaders, and we'll talk about that in a minute if you don't know what STEM is, to break the cycle of 70% failure rate with respect to people who can't get off the spreadsheets, can't get out of the numbers, can't get out of whatever. Anyhow, Charlotte Allen has more than 20 years of leadership experience at companies like Kraft Foods, working with iconic brands like Kraft Mac and Cheese. There's a favorite. Oreos, there's another favorite. Triscuits, there's another favorite. Man. And she has a PhD from the Ohio State University and is the international best-selling author of the book, Rebel Success for Leaders, Lead, Grow, and Sell Fearlessly. Charlotte, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Frank. I'm excited to be here with you and your listeners.
You know, I see Oreos here and Triscuits. I mean, do those come home with you ever?
Those used to come home with me a lot, especially when we were creating new versions of them for taste testing.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I had an opportunity to interview with Chiquita Brands, which is down in Cincinnati, and they brought bananas in every Friday. That was what they talked about. And they said, yeah, it sounds neat until about month 3. And you're sick of bananas. So it becomes a chore. All right. Working with STEM. And for those who are not familiar, STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. I think I got those right. And we talk a lot about STEM education and getting girls and women more into STEM. STEM people, I grew up, my father was a professor at an engineering school, Michigan Tech University, and there were a lot of STEM people there. And very, very left brain people who like to work with things and not with people. And you're trying to create change amongst these people, meaningful change. And you talk about it having to be people-centered. So I really kind of want to jump off there and, what are the challenges? I mean, I worked in public accounting, accounting types, legal types, tax attorney types, very left brain. Hey, you need to go see your clients. Didn't want to go see their clients. They wanted to sit and just tinker with the spreadsheet. My wife doesn't listen to the podcast, so I'll lump her in too. I mean, she's like that, you ought to go to the happy hour with your coworkers. No, I want to kind of work on one more thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You see it.
I see it. Yes. So STEM folks are usually hired by an organization because of their deep expertise. So the organization originally says, we need somebody with an expertise in, polymer science chemistry. So I need to hire that person because I want to drive my innovation agenda. Or they'll say, I need to have somebody who's really good at this new technology. Artificial intelligence comes to mind, right? So I need to hire an AI expert. So they hire these people, which is the right move because they need to build that expertise internally. But then when they get them in the organization, that person finds themselves at some point in their career to be required to do two things. One is the thing they've been trained for, which is their expertise. Mm-hmm. The second thing is, you need to influence, right? Because we are not polymer chemists. The rest of us in this organization are not polymer chemists. We're not the accounting experts. We're not the engineers who design equipment. We're people who talk with consumers or customers or clients about stuff that's real to them. So we don't understand you, Mr. Technical or Miss Technical person, and you need to do a better job of meeting with the clients. You need to do a better job of influencing your peers. You need to do a better job of leading, right? That word comes up a lot. You need to do a better job of leading. So I feel for these folks, right? Because that's not how they've been trained up to that point. And as a business, the perspective is, I hired these folks. They're supposed to keep me competitive, but I don't understand what they're saying. And I don't sell to them. I sell to regular people, right? Regular people, right? And those folks are the people that buy my stuff. So I have to translate this to regular speak. And it's true of organizational change because usually, especially today, you have a technology transformation that is just going like a freight train through the entire globe in every industry you can think of. And those IT people are the same, right? They want to just do their IT stuff, right? They don't necessarily interact well with the end users, with the folks who are consumer, client, customer facing. So it's the same dynamic that's set up. So that's kind of herein lies the problem. The organization needs them. They tell them they need to be developed. And often what I see is often it's top down. So the organization will say, you need to do this, right? And we forget sometimes that we have not included those technical leaders, STEM folks, in the conversations before. We have not included them in the same level of professional development that we have before. We are not transparent, so they may not be able to access the same level of business information that your sales team or your marketing team or your strategy team or your accounting team has access to. So they aren't able to see the same set of playing cards on the table. And their skills have never really been developed likely as strongly within the people side of things. So how do I collaborate with those? How do I translate what I do to make it work for a fourth grade person, a kid, right? Can my son tell me what it does? So that herein lies the dilemma, right? Organizations get frustrated. They say, my team's not performing. The team stops performing. The team stops giving ideas. The team doesn't feel like they're valued. Nobody listens to me. My ideas aren't important. I need to go somewhere else, which is really easy today because I can get a whole lot more money by jumping, right?
Right. Yeah.
And then you end up with this turn that seems to never end because that cycle just keeps continuing. Your organizational change goes through, you hit a wall because, nobody knew it was coming. Well, but you didn't ask for my input. Well, you didn't incorporate my suggestions, but it has to happen because it's on a timeline, right? Because organization goes through a system of, checks and balances. It goes through a timeline. It goes through a change matrix. Almost never do people think about how to make that people focused, right? How do I know what the why is, right? Even technical STEM people get the concept of why am I doing, what difference do I want to make in the world? That is hugely important to them, just like it is to everybody else. They can relate. They have friends, they have family, they can be social, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not that they lack it. It's just a matter of how do we pull it all together and include as well as be transparent, right? Those are the bottom line if you want. Now, it's not easy getting there. but that's kind of where I head with folks.
I mean, as you talk, it's almost as if these people are speaking a different language. When I worked in public accounting, I was a tax consultant. I noticed we had the issue of the firm would go to the Ohio State University, wherever, major universities, and would hire the best and the brightest from the law and tax school or the accounting programs. Bring them in because they are the best and the brightest, and they can pass the CPA's exam, and they get it. They get the accounting nuts and bolts. And then they're there for 2 years, and then all of a sudden it's okay, now we need you to manage people. And so it's this new hurdle they need to, which is something totally different. That kind of weeds some people out. And then at some point it's like, okay, great. You're technically fine. You've gotten through this hurdle of managing others. Now we need you to go sell, which, oh my God. And that was that's what weeded people out. And maybe rightfully so, because the people who are the partners were the people who could establish those relationships and sell. And what you're talking about is even worse, because not worse, more challenging, because as somebody going through it, I could see where the technical abilities mattered. And I'm outgoing, I'm salesy. I like to go talk to people. That was never a problem for me. I could see where other people were running into the challenges. I could see why they were running into the challenges. I couldn't get them through it. What you're talking about are people who really are it's different cultures, right? You have marketing, which is just a different culture than R&D or, whatever,
IT, right?
Yeah.
IT.
Yeah. What are some of the biggest challenges of getting them to understand the problem? I think we have to understand a problem before we can try and tackle it, right? And maybe they see that as the problem, and that's why they're calling you. I guess, how do you get them beyond this? It's like a marriage. You're like a marriage counselor, corporate marriage counselor.
What's true of almost every problem is the person who feels the pain has something they need to change from themselves, right? And then almost always there's something within their surroundings or their environment, or i.e. other people or the team, that needs to change as well. So oftentimes there's a couple of challenges, and really it's about how do we teach people how to be more inclusive. So again, so often we are focused on our timelines and our spreadsheets and our models and what's the newest, somebody's greatest way to be successful. None of those ever have a conversation deeply about how do we include people in conversations? How do we reach out and build relationships? How do we be more transparent with our information? Because you're expecting somebody, to do something standing on one foot with their hand tied behind their back and a bucket over their head, right? It is not a recipe for success. Okay. So I think a lot of it is level playing field. A lot of it is that problem tends to materialize itself outside of the technical parts of the organization. So oftentimes you'll see functional silos.
Right.
And that happens even amongst sales and marketing, right? People who are closer to the end user. So some of that is how do the silos work amongst each other? Some of it is how does your organizational setup work with your clients and customers? Sometimes it's the clients or the customers who are actually identifying the problem back because they're getting mixed messages, right? From across. So it doesn't take long, because these things transcend every business category out there. Because they are people things. They are not driven by the discipline or the technology, right? Or when I'm talking about Oreos or, Bitcoin, it's all going to be about people, which is the common denominator.
When you work with companies, do you look for for lack of a better term, a translator, somebody who can bridge the gap between marketing and IT, or marketing and engineering, who can speak both languages more or less? It's all English. Well, usually it's English, but it's all English. But to understand when somebody throws a technical term out, okay, this is what it means.
Right. So it's all English. Is it British or is it American? Right.
Oh,
So
well, there you go.
all
Yeah.
English, right?
Yeah.
So here's what I tend to look for. I totally advocate working with teams. So, and the reason I say that is that you will be so much more effective for the organization when you work within their world, right? Which means the team. And there needs to be some point person within their organization who has an aptitude for doing this. So my personal experience with being in that seat is that you do need someone who, even if they can't translate the language today, they have the skills to bridge across, right? They have the skills to reach out and be inclusive. They have the skills to create that level of transparency. They have the skills to bring people in, right? And the position that's offered them within the organization to do that. So that's the most important thing. Ideally, they're a connector, a translator, a collaborator, somebody who follows some of those skills. They need to be very empathetic to all people, right? Even those that are less easy to be empathetic towards. I'll say it that way. There's a lot of really strong experts in these organizations who are passionate about the customer or the client, and the organization will tell me that they are the biggest complainers, that they are the biggest obstacles and roadblock people they have ever encountered. But when you dig into it, the reason that they're that way is because they are passionate about delivering top-notch something to the outside, right? And this stuff that piles in on them messes with their ability to be an expert, right? And that's where they draw their value. So some of it is understanding. Again, it's how do we be inclusive? How do we pull people in? How do we get their opinions, right? How do we teach? It isn't as hard as some of the systems set it up to be. And I think that's part of the problem is we send people to a class, or we tell people to go take some training, or we decide that there's, a new metric we want to use. And it really just involves people. And I say that even though I know it's hard, because most of the management team at that organization was not trained this way. So they are not modeling the behavior for anybody else in the organization, and they're not modeling for that person the new way they need that person to work. And that presents another systemic challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all, I kind of want to back up. We all know the problem's there. And you'd be a fool not to recognize it. Like you say, it's everywhere. It's how do you get people to buy into changing the problem? Because I'm sure there's a lot of finger pointing. Well, it's not me, it's them, right?
Always.
I'm really smart. I saw it, in public accounting. I'm brilliant at taxes. You're not brilliant at taxes. Well, you're an idiot. Well, yeah. No, they're not. They're just brilliant at accounting things, and so you can't say they're an idiot. They're dumb. They just don't understand what you do. But together, you guys can achieve a whole lot more. I think part of the problem is, I'll let you touch on this, and just our incentives, stock plans, bonuses, things like that are all very, very left brain, if you will. Very, hey, we can see them, very short term. And this people thing is not measurable.
Well, so I'll say I had this conversation this morning with the client. So they'll say it's not measurable, or they'll say people need to know how to measure it. And the point that you made about incentives, stock and bonuses and all those other metrics are why people don't want to do it, because they are incented to drive their metrics to an endpoint, and they are incented to make sure their team drives the metric to the endpoint. So when I talk with them about inclusivity, I start with, what does that other group over there consider to be their priority, right? There's almost always a way that whatever your initiative is, I'll call it that, whatever you're trying to do, you can figure out how to help them or help to express it in their terms, or how to help them understand that it will, afford the better good. When you have an organization whose incentive structure is way out of whack, and that's not going to happen, that's a different challenge altogether.
Yeah.
And that begs a difference from the incentive structure level. So that's one of the things that we may have to work on. But how do you measure it? So I have been working with this client for a while, and they're at the stage where they need to figure out, why is this working? It's been working like a dream, right? Oh my gosh, this worked well. Our timelines didn't get delayed. And I said, it's time to expand. It's time to get into this sort of community of practice mode where this one example gets translated to many examples. And they're like, okay, but what do we call it? And what do we do? And how do we know the thing that's working? And I said, okay, so tell me what you see as the things that you've done different. And they're like, well, we're being more inclusive. And I said, okay, good, inclusive. We're being more transparent. And I said, okay, good, transparent. And I said, are we focusing more on the people? And they're like, yeah, we're focusing more on the people. And they said, yeah, but how do I measure that? So same conversation. And I said, okay, well, how do we talk about, they're a company that loves surveys, love employee engagement surveys. And they have like a metric that goes to the outside, right, to their clients. But they have always expected new initiatives to create a dip to their metric to the outside. They would fall off for a while and they would regroup. And I said, well, that sounds like a self-fulfilling prophecy. What if what all of these things do on the inside does not create a dip? Right. Mm-hmm. And he's like, that's, do you think we could do that? And I said, why don't you try? Right. Yeah. Right now, you're just agreeing it's going to happen. So you're not really incenting yourselves to step up to the next level. So we toyed a little bit. I don't like to dictate to an organization what their metric is, because that's a very internal set of language.
Well, they've got to own it. They have to
own it.
Right.
But they're going to think about this whole thing about being inclusive, right? And they're gonna think about this thing about, I've said from day one, I said, you guys are not including people. I said, you're not being transparent. I said, are there parts of the organization that don't have the level of information that they need? And they're like, maybe. And I said, well, how can you expect that of them? And they're like, So I think they're kind of understanding that. And it'll be interesting to me to see kind of how they form that. These connector integrator roles within an organization are immensely valuable. And this company's very data driven. So I am excited to see kind of how but it's usually about no alterations to timelines, more successes to market. It's employee engagement. It's whatever surveys they do inside to get to people's value. It is, I feel like my voice is heard, those voice of the employee surveys that happen. Right. Those are usually the metrics organizations can use to demonstrate change or moving the needle. The fact that retention increases is another one, because they are going to have folks who are more engaged and want to stay because they have an organization that listens and includes them. So again, I'm going back to all of those things we think of as people metrics, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Which are non-traditional.
No, they are non-traditional, and they're we're comfortable with numbers, right?
Spreadsheets, all about it.
Yep. We're comfortable with numbers. It's a language we all understand, especially money. And these other things are just, we're not comfortable with them. I don't want to go so far so we don't trust them, but it's just like we just don't use them that much. So we're not quite there yet. It's just, it sounds like with this company, it's like, okay, we need to kind of bridge this. And then we're one step further along, and then people are comfortable with that. And then you can you'll take them through the next phase and then the next phase and so on and so forth. So
I often say you should never come up with a solution that's top down, because top down stuff is easy, right? Somebody
Right.
up there creates it and they sort of squash it, right? This is the way it's going to be. I said, you need to figure out how to weave it through. And then all of a sudden, two things have already happened for this company. Everybody thinks they ought to own change management. You and I both know nobody ever wants change management,
Right.
ever wants it. And I said, okay, if you have people fighting at a senior level to own this, you've been successful, because nobody wants this, right? The second thing that started to happen was that they had one group that was in control of stuff, right? And they had another group that did not have a seat at the table. And what we've kind of done is we've elevated the seat at the table for the group who is actually outside facing, customer facing.
Right.
And now what's happening is the first group is going, wait a second, my table's not that large. My living room is getting a little congested. I don't like the conversation that's happening at my table. And I said, good, that is your second success point. Because now we've identified that the first group also needs some level of attention and development and inclusivity, right? And transparency, because all of these other people at the table now, they had no knowledge of, right? It's not just the one group, it's the rest of it too. So I said, good, you've hit the second point. And sometimes when I say stuff like that, he looks at me like, really? I said, you would not have believed me if I told you this at the beginning. So we're in a good place right now.
Well, let's shift gears here. We kind of wrap up. People are listening. What would be a good contact for you? Types of things you're looking to do. Obviously, you have the book. I assume with the book, you get out there and speak. Those are just assumptions. I'll throw it to you. And then how can we get a hold of you?
Sure. So from a business standpoint, obviously I have consulting practice. So if you're interested in that, and you're in a STEM function or a STEM organization, then you're kind of my peeps. From a standpoint of a public speaker, I do workshops for organizations. I do workshops for associations. So if you're affiliated in any of those ways, that would be great. And then I am launching this year an online program for those who may want to plug in as an individual and sort of absorb some of these trainings to progress their own careers. So that is coming later this year. How to find me on LinkedIn primarily. So Charlotte Allen, Food Innovator, is how you find me there. And the website, if you're looking in that direction, is rebelsuccessforleaders.com.
Great. I will get that. Your corporate website in the show notes. I appreciate you being here today. I like kicking this around. I wish I would have talked to you 27 years ago when I was still in corporate. Maybe not. I enjoy my life, but thank you for being on.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure, Frank. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.